encouragement of public comment during our meetings. We will be accepting testimony from all parties. If you wish to testify on a particular petition before us this evening using the Zoom platform, please use the raise hand feature. You can raise your hand at any time and we'll recognize you at the appropriate time for the presentation of evidence for each case. If in person, please hand staff your speaker's card. Planner Robin Keefe will be moderating the hybrid meeting and will be asked to provide names of those individuals that wish to speak. I'd like to call the meeting of the City of Wildwood's Board of Adjustment to order. The board members present today are Bob Morris, board member, Arnie Sprunger, board member, Mike Lee, board member, Kevin Lux, board member, and myself, Jared Frank, chair. The Department of Planning staff is present as Joe Vunich, Director of Planning, and Robin Keefe, planner. City Attorney John Young and Rick Brown, Director of Public Works, and the court reporter Beth Blackburn are also present. First, I offer into the record the affidavit of publication pertaining to today's meeting, May 16th, 2024. And take official notice of the zoning ordinance of City of Wildwood, including Chapter 400, Article 2, authorizing and establishing the Board of Adjustment's powers and duties. Now, let me explain the hearing procedure. Please be aware the information I'm about to describe is also provided on the Board of Adjustment public hearing procedure handout, which was available online prior and up to tonight's meeting. This meeting is informal in its nature. However, the meeting's proceedings will be recorded by a reporter for future transcription if needed. The petitions are called in the order listed on the agenda. As the petition is called, I will ask a Department of Planning staff member to read each request into the record. Thereafter, the Department of Planning will have opening remarks and a brief slide presentation. Then the petitioner or his or her representative will be asked to state their name and address, be sworn in by the court reporter, make a brief presentation to the board explaining the nature of the requested variance, and present such evidence and witness testimony that may have evident the practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship that warrant the variance. The board will only consider the unique character of the property to determine whether they warrant the granting of a variance. Board members may also ask questions to clarify the facts of the petitioner's presentation. When the board is satisfied with the material presented by the petitioner, the chair will then ask if there is anyone present or online who would like to speak in favor or opposition to requested variance. Each speaker will be asked to provide their name and address, be sworn in, and then provide the evidence and oral testimony. Procedurally, the petitioner may request a continuance at any time during the hearing prior to a call for the vote in order to bring in additional evidence or testimony. The board may also continue the proceedings. After the submission of testimony and evidence from all interested parties, the board will ask a staff person to provide the Department of Planning's report in the matter if requested by any member of the board, the petitioner, or any individual that is participating in person or online. Once all witnesses have been heard, the chair will call for a motion to grant or deny with or without conditions, then the board will vote. At that time, the presentation of evidence relating to the petition is concluded and no further evidence will be permitted. The board may make a decision today. 4 members of the board must vote in favor of the variance for it to be approved. If a variance is approved, the petitioner has 6 months to obtain the necessary permits or establish the use, or it will expire. If the board's decision is unfavorable, the petitioner has the right of appeal to the St. Louis County Circuit Court. This appeal must be done within 30 days of the decision. Ms. Keefe, are there any questions at this time?
There are any questions online at this time, please use the raise hand feature. And if there are any questions from the audience? Mr. Chair, I see no questions.
Hearing no questions at this time, the meeting will proceed. The department, please read the first request into the record, which will be followed by a brief slide presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the first item on tonight's agenda and the only item is BA 12-24 Billy Johns, 5338 Mirasol Manor Way, Eureka, Missouri 63025, care of Doug Nance, Lombardo Companies, 4 Research Park, Suite 130, St. Charles, Missouri 63304. Request an exception to the specific yard requirements and exceptions for the purpose of constructing a new single-family dwelling on the property situated at 3320 Whitsett Park Road, locator number 26V 510179, Carter's Corner subdivision, lot 2A, thereby authorizing the placement of it within the defined 100-year floodplain boundary and therefore a minimum setback distance of 0 feet in lieu of 50 feet required from it. The design does indicate a low sill elevation will be 2 feet above the base floodplain elevation of Carr Creek. This request is contrary to the requirements of Chapter 415.070 FP Floodplain District Regulations and Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban Resident District Regulations of the City of Wildwood zoning ordinance. This particular property is located in Ward 6. Mr. Chair, before Ms. Keefe begins the slide presentation, the department would like to enter into the record the following items. Chapter 415 of the City of Wildwood Municipal Code, Article 2, which covers the Board of Adjustment. Chapter 415 of the same City of Wildwood Municipal Code, the zoning ordinance. The file that has been developed and maintained by the Department of Planning regarding this particular request and all contents contained therein, including the department's report with recommendation. And then finally, any testimony that is offered as part of tonight's hearing. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. The subject site of our request this evening is located in the southern portion of Wildwood, just to the west of Highway 109, and primarily on the south side of Witsits Fork Road, which is a private road maintained by the Witsits Fork Roadway Maintenance Association. The subject lot is 12.67 acres in size, and it's zoned floodplain non-urban residence district. It has about 410 feet of frontage on Witsits Fork Road. The property is irregularly shaped, as you can see. It is primarily well-maintained pasture, with the very northern portion of it across Witsits Fork Road being steeply sloped and wooded. The property has several small outbuildings upon it that were illegally constructed by a previous owner. The petitioner this evening is requesting to construct a new single-family dwelling and related improvements within the defined 100-year floodplain boundary. This would result in, if approved, in a 0-foot setback from this floodplain boundary in lieu of the required 50 feet from it required by the City of Wildwood. The design of the home indicates that the low sill elevation is 2 feet above the base floodplain elevation of Carr Creek, which defines the southern border or boundary of this lot. When originally platted, there was an area of this parcel of ground that was flood-free, but the new FEMA flood maps show that almost the entirety of the lot is now encumbered by floodplain. The flood events of 2015 and 2017 on the Merrimack River resulted in the flooding of this property and surrounding properties. And it still is possible that it experiences intermittent flooding. The immediate area is utilized for single-family dwellings and related accessories. The floodplain designated properties typically do not contain dwellings, but rather accessory structures and on well-maintained pasture and open space. In order for the city to even consider a dwelling of this nature in the floodplain, it does have to go through some pretty stringent review and requirements, including a no-rise certification, special setback distances, low sill provisions, and also authorization from the Director of Public Works, which is the city's floodplain administrator. This is an aerial view of Witsits Fork Road, where you can see Highway 109. Here's Witsits Fork, and this is the petitioner's property and with an outline of the proposed improvements. And this is another view of the property with the floodplain boundaries defined upon it, including the preliminary floodplain boundary, which is the new one. This is the footprint of the proposed improvements. This variance, if approved, would authorize a single-family dwelling on this lot. The intent of the petitioner is to raise the building on the site higher than the 100-year floodplain elevation. And if the variance is not granted, this property would primarily be used for passive activities. This is a little bit harder to read, but you do have it in front of you as well. But the preliminary floodplain boundary is outlined in this light blue. This is the effective flood, base flood elevation, sorry. Base floodplain. This is the proposed dwelling. This is flat work associated with the dwelling, including the drive. And then this is the roadway easement area of Whitsets Fork Road. Again, the dwelling will be within that 100-year floodplain. This is looking south at the subject lot. This is looking north at that steeply wooded portion of it that's directly across Whitsets Fork. This is looking west on Whitsets Fork Road. This is looking east upon it. This gives us an eastern perspective of the lot. This is the eastern half of it, looking south. This is looking southeast at some of the structures that are currently upon it. This is looking west. And this is looking south at primarily the western portion of the property, and this is a rock access drive. This is looking south. Oops, sorry. The city has received 12 public comment with 10 opposed to the petitioner's request. One is in support and one was a neutral comment. At this time, I'm going to conclude my presentation. We do have Rick Brown, our Director of Public Works, with us this evening. And of course, Director Vunich and I are available to answer your questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keefe. Question, Mr. Sprunger?
I do. Ms. Keefe, could you put up the map that shows the floodplains again? I have a question about that. That one. Yeah, thank you. So there's several kind of blue lines going on there. One looks like you used a highlighter or whatever. Okay. The one that's not the highlighted blue, but is still blue. Okay. Is that the original or earlier floodplain boundary?
So the dark blue line that is not highlighted is the present effective base floodplain boundary. The highlighted blue line is the preliminary, so that is going to be the future floodplain boundary.
So it's the one that's not effective yet.
That is correct, but I'm going to probably ask Mr. Brown to follow up on this. But I do believe in these instances, the soon to be adopted floodplain boundary does have significance in this case.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. The board members, that we're in a transition period relative to floodplain mapping. We're working currently, the city is working with SEMA to start the process of initiating new floodplain maps. So while they're not adopted, they're not official, we have the information that will be on those maps essentially. And so we're trying to use that information if it helps to make better decisions and be more conservative in our judgments. So what we've shown on here is the current effective, essentially 100-year or base flood elevation boundary, and then what will be the 100-year base flood elevation boundary. The request to you tonight is relative to the current, which is what is required or lawful or on the books essentially. But it will change with the implementation of the new floodplain maps, and that process should start this year sometime and take another year to 18 months to conclude. So it's a fairly long drawn out process to go through the implementation of new floodplain maps.
Okay, so just to be clear, are they technically compliant? I mean, how does the city decide when they start to require a person, a homeowner or a property owner, to live within the new map? Because it looks like they're okay on the old map, but they're not okay with the new map. Is that right?
That's not totally correct. They're not
Okay.
compliant with either map, frankly. The one that's effective is not the preliminary, but the current map. And the request to you is relative to the current map tonight. But once you make that judgment tonight, it would be effective with the next version of maps as well.
Okay. So when did you know, or when was it known to the general public or whatever, that this new, I'm sorry, I don't mean to stand up here. This is the new one, right? When was this made known? When did you know, or when would a landowner know that, hey, there's a new floodplain map coming up? When would you want to know that?
Well, an engineer that works in this area would probably be knowledgeable enough to recognize that. And certainly the city is aware of that process that is currently ongoing.
But would have you known that? And I'm sorry I'm spending so much time on this, but I think, at least for me, timing is kind of a deal here. Did you know 5 years ago that this was going to be the new map?
5 years, no, not 5 years ago, but the process started, I couldn't quote you the exact date, but it's been underway for probably 2 years now. It's been a while.
Okay, so it's been a year or so. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
the adopted FEMA floodplain designations are from 2015. And so the update is cycling through to about a 10-year window. But as Mr. Brown said, after the floods of 2015, 16, and 17, things were starting to change, and the maps have been circulated, the new maps in a preliminary form, not adopted, have been circulated for a bit of time. And as Mr. Brown mentioned, we're always going to take a cautious approach with floodplain. Typically, what the city does in floodplain areas where there are habitable buildings, we try to basically buy them and remove them so that if a flood does occur, someone's not put at risk, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Munoz. At this time, will the petitioner please come forward, state his or her name, address, relation to the property, and then we'll get you sworn in by the court reporter.
Good evening, Doug Nance, Lombardo Homes, on behalf of Billy Johnson. I present for Research Park, St. Charles, Missouri, 63304.
Mr.
Please
Nance,
raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Nance, if you could please explain the nature of the request, the hardship or practical difficulty in necessitating the variance as it relates to the character of the property.
Yes. So Mr. Johns purchased this property. I mean, obviously, this property was recorded out of the portion of it out of the floodplain. Obviously, the new lines that you're showing that might come into effect 18 months from now was not made aware to him when he purchased this property. So he was under the understanding that he had plenty of room to build this house, which is his dream house that he wanted to build. And that as long as he brought it out of the floodplain, he'd be complying with FEMA and with Wildwood's ordinances, which is what we did. I have Chris with TWM with me also tonight, who actually did the flood study. So if you have any questions regarding that and the no rise that came of that we will be submitting to FEMA as well, if approved here, to get, since we be in compliance with them as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have in regards to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nance. This time we'll open up for any board members' questions.
So you had mentioned that the current owner, when they purchased the property, was not aware of the new flood.
Correct.
Lane.
Whenever they were selling this property, the realtor, from my understanding, that was selling this property, I mean, it was disclosed that there was a floodplain on it.
Mhm.
And that flood line was the current flood line that was made. Even when they went through due diligence, they did their survey, it didn't come up from the survey company that there was this new future line that was going to be proposed from that survey. So he wasn't made aware of anything at that time. So he was assuming he could build his dream home, went ahead with the purchase of this lot, which is when we went into, he came to us and then we started doing the whole floodplain study for him and getting this, all the information out there to make sure that we could raise it up above the 2 foot, above the 100-year floodplain, and also show a no rise. So we wouldn't be affecting any of the neighbors or any of the properties around them.
So when did they buy the property?
He brought the property, I think, about years so ago. Over a year ago.
March of 23, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what the county records say, but I
Yeah.
just was curious. Sometimes they're not right. But anyway, yeah, okay. Okay.
Any other initial questions from the board for Mr. Nance?
Maybe one other
Yes, sir.
quick one. Again, this is all about the timing thing. Did the petitioner or the owner of the property, did they contact the city to see whether or not?
No,
there was.
not that I'm aware of. Usually,
Okay.
in these situations, and in this situation, you go with your survey and go with the information, a lot of the information. Not being aware that lines can change at time.
Sure.
The normal, go out there, some of the land, if you're experienced land developer, probably you would understand that maybe that, but your typical lot buyer, home buyer is not going to understand that all the time and all the details that go into that.
And they're relying
they're
on
relying on the survey
the survey.
and the information being presented to them from the realtors.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Johns, you had your hand up. Did you want to come? We'll have to get you come up to the podium, please, and we'll get you sworn in. State your name, address, in relation to the property. We'll get you sworn in.
Billy Johns, 5338 Mearsall Manor Way, Eureka, Missouri.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I was gonna say that whenever I did buy the property, before I bought it, I went to the city, met with the engineers in City of Wildwood, also asked them to email me confirmation of that we could build on this property, which Lombardo didn't know at that time. But yeah, I did meet with the city. They showed me where we could build a house. And they also emailed me everything and had multiple conversations. And then that was it. Then I went through Lombardo and then, but yeah, I did.
So when did you actually go talk to the city and ask them for that information?
Upstairs. Right
Well,
here.
you said you asked them whether you could build your home where you wanted to build.
Well, because there were plans,
Mhm.
there were original plans to build on the property. So I took these plans and I said, yes, those plans are all right. And I asked them if they could email me a copy to make sure if I had all the copies, approvals to build, and they emailed them to me. So then that's when I turned them into Lombardo, but I don't believe you were at that time. And that was the last I heard of it until recently. The new flood came up. are the new water levels, but that was never mentioned, or else I would have never bought or have paid that much money for property and thought that we could do it there. So that's it. I was just letting you know that I did talk to someone, but so
Thank you.
Any other board member questions from Mr. Nance or Mr. Johns? Seeing none, at this time, we will open the floor to any speakers in the audience who may speak in favor or opposition to this request. We'll start with any speaker cards you have, Ms. Keefe.
It's Mr. Chair, my first speaker card is for Mark Bramier at 3348 Whitsett Fork Road.
So please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in by the court reporter, please.
Yeah, my name is Mark Bromeyer. I live at 3348 Whitsett Fork Road. Just a few houses or properties down from this property. I think that covers it.
We'll get you sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
I've got several concerns. I had originally submitted my concerns and some a photograph a month ago before the last month's meeting. And I had submitted it to Mr. Vunich, and I don't know if that's anything that we can look at on the screen tonight. All I have with me is a black and white copy of it. But in essence, what it shows is, and you've mentioned several floods as of late, but the most recent one was in August of 2019. And that pretty much came up and covered what is currently the 500-year flood line, at least the current 500-year flood line. It came to within 40 feet of our back door. And in our case, the 100-year and the 500-year are pretty close to the same location. But I'm just concerned, first off, taking away flood capacity. Second, I'm worried about the bridge because it's already gets flooded even early, even before it gets to that point. And third, I'm just concerned that Mr. Johns will be living with a problem soon. And, we already have at least one house closer to 109 that gets flooded and was never in the floodplain until they moved in. So I'm just concerned about those aspects of it. I also, when we built back in 2000, besides there was a 25-foot setback required by St. Louis County from the 100-year line. And then Wildwood added to that by another 25-foot. So I'm wondering, okay, we're avoiding this or making this setback zero. Does St. Louis County still have any say so in, the 25-foot setback, or does Wildwood's variance allow that to happen? And as far as the future floodplain versus the current one, whether they knew it or not, I don't know that you can enforce something that's in the future, just like you can't really enforce a future building code. He has the right to, but he's still not not abiding to the current setbacks that are required by the county or the city. And then I have an aesthetic concern, and I don't know how much dirt is coming in. I haven't seen any civil plans to know how much dirt's being brought in, how they're achieving this no rise condition. But it just seems like we're gonna build a huge mound out there to get the basement level above the floodplain. Then we're gonna have dirt up higher, and then we're gonna have a 2-story building on top of that. And to me, it looks like we're building a plateau on a house, and it's just not gonna look like it's in a natural setting. I think that pretty much covers my concerns and questions.
Questions? Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, our next speaker card is from Eric Teagarden at 3340 Whitsett Fork Road.
Seaguard, if you could state your name, address, relation to this property, and then we'll get you sworn in by the court reporter.
Hi, I'm Eric Teagarden, 3340 Whitsett Fork Road, and I'm a neighbor a couple of houses upstream.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Mr. Teagarden.
Sure. Similar to Mr. Bromar, the main concern that I really wanted to bring up is that we've had numerous floods. I think there's been at least 4 times where our bridge has been underwater in the past since I moved in 2015. Specifically the 2019 flood in August was a shock to wake up to what I would describe as a literal river in the back part of the pasture. It came up to the edge of my barn, which is on the edge of the 500-year floodplain. And this was fast-moving flash flood water. It was I did some back of the napkin math. Was I think about 75,000 gallons per second of flow rate. So that's not a small amount of water. Because we got, I think, 5 inches of rain over the course of a couple of hours. And so I'm very concerned that if we are building up significant fill in the area, and I understand that what you guys are looking at is specific to the 100-year floodplain. But just from a flood concern perspective, and knowing that the future map is showing that a lot more of that region is going to be in the 100-year floodplain, I'm very concerned that we're going to be removing material that could be hosting water, and B, choking the flow. You're narrowing the area that we have for the flash flood waters to flow through. That's only going to mean it's going to back up upstream. And we already had at least one incident where the water came all the way up to the edge of the barn. So what happens if we choke the flow, get a similar size storm, and instead of reaching the edge of the barn, now it's multiple feet inside of the barn, causing property damage. So I'm very concerned that if you grant this variance, that it will cause real property damage to other people in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Mr. Teagarden. Any questions, comments? Teagarden? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, my next speaker's card is from Jessica Egler at 3340 Whitsett Fork Road.
Ms. Egler, if you could state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in by the court reporter.
Yes, my name is Jessica Igler. I live at 3340 Whitsett Fork Road with Eric Teagarden. We are the property in question's far western neighbor. We're adjacent on the peninsula, sticks out the back of the property on the southern side.
Get you sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like Eric, I am very concerned about the potential for this to disrupt the flow of water through the valley. In particular, in the 2019 flood, the fast-moving flash flood water flipped our adjacent neighbor, the Carters, at 3330 Whitsett Fork Road. It flipped their propane tank upside down, and that is a very dangerous situation. That propane tank is well out of the 100-year floodplain. It is well I believe it to be out of the 500-year floodplain, but that is only my belief. However, it was for certain upside down. I have also seen the property in question's pasture fence completely underwater. In my previous comment that I submitted online, I submitted a picture of that. That is a pasture fence. It is 4 to 5 feet high and it is completely underwater. The 2019 flood also took out my pasture fence along the eastern edge of my pasture, just completely uprooted it. Several, almost 100 feet out of the 100-year floodplain, just from the velocity of the water. So I'm very concerned about anything that could potentially choke that water flow through the valley, as well as I think it's important to note that Witsett's Fork has one bridge in and out of the valley. So when that bridge goes underwater, we lose access to emergency services, which is vital for health and safety. Furthermore, I Googled the FEMA variance guidance, which is FEMA P993 variances and the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a PDF you can find online. And it stated that there has to be 3 things met to grant the variance and not put the community's national flood insurance participation in jeopardy. And these are hardship. There must be a significant hardship based on the property, not on the personal circumstances of the applicant. And I understand that this property was sold for a great deal more than it was previously sold in 2019. And that is unfortunate to me. But I don't think that we can take the price of the property into consideration here. The variance must be required to make reasonable use of the property. And I don't think we are meeting that requirement either, as several of the slides we saw tonight actually show my house on the ridge. This house, the ridge portion, the steeply wooded portion of the property has approximately the same depth and nearly the same length as my property where my house is, where I've lived for 9 years. I would consider that making reasonable use of a residential property to have the house on the ridge. We've talked about the increased risk, which leaves us only with the minimum action. I don't think that building a house this large, and because of the size and shape of the house, impacting the 100-year floodplain, meets the requirement for the minimum action. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Ms. Hegler?
Mr. Chair, my next speaker card is from Robert Hendershot at 17426 Radcliffe Place.
My name is Robert Hendershot. I live in the Radcliffe Place subdivision. We are immediately south of Carr Creek and adjacent to Witsett's Fork.
Sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Do.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We do not live in Witsett's Fork, but we live next door and we share concerns of some of our wonderful neighbors in Witsett's Fork about flood issues in that area. I've lived there since 1981. We've had 4 floods that have damaged our swimming pool, our tennis court, and our sewage treatment plant, which sits right along Park Creek. In approximately 2001, the Missouri Highway Department raised 109, which is the only entrance and exit for our subdivision is on 109. And they raised it above the 100-year floodplain. So this would never happen again. 2008, it came within a foot or two of covering 109. 2015, it completely covered it. And in, 2017, it completely covered it up to the point of about 6 feet over. I did share with Joe a picture that we have from May of 2017. I don't know the procedures here, but if I could share that picture with you to show you what impact it had on the entrance of a subdivision. When this happened, the first three houses on the south side of Radcliffe Place Drive had serious water damage in their houses. Literally, we had no way of getting in and out of the subdivision. The Wildwood Police had a car placed on Radcliffe Place Drive. What you're seeing there is the boat bringing the shift change in for the police department into our subdivision. The Eureka Fire Protection District put a fire truck in the back of our subdivision so we'd have fire protection. If we had a medical emergency, we would have to bring a boat in to get us out. Now, we don't have the same problem with flash floods on Carr Creek that our wonderful neighbors in Wiss's Fork have. But the problem we have is when the Merrimack backs up, Carr Creek is the major source of our flooding, causing damage, serious damage to our pool, tennis court, and most importantly, to our sewage treatment plant. Now, we have since sold that sewage treatment plant to Missouri American Water, and they own and maintain that. But we would suffer the detriment of losing our sewage treatment plant for whatever long it goes on. Now, what's happened here, 1982, there was a major flood out here before Radcliffe was built. I don't know if there were houses in Wiss's Fork at the time. But looking back at all the major flood records from the Eureka thing, which is where the National Weather Service maintains their records, of the top 10 most severe floods of all time, 7 have happened since 1982. The top 2 happened in 15 and 17. So the progression far exceeds this 100-year floodplain issue. And I talked to Joe about this. 100-year floodplain is really a fiction. We have a 20% chance of a major flood every year because of what we've seen over the last several years. 100-year floodplain, as I read, means that you have a 1% chance. So any variance of a 100-year floodplain is it just causes incredible risks for the rest of us that already live there. So for those reasons, we really would like the board to deny this variance because we don't need any more impact on our damage from flooding. It's a serious problem. We all know it. And so I thank you for your time. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Hendershot?
Thank you.
Thank you. Proceed, Ms. Keefe.
Mr. Chair, my next speaker is Brett Mills at 3326 Wetsets Fork Road.
Thank you. It's Brett Miller, 3326 Witsets Fork Road, 63038. I am the next door neighbor. Is there, get you go ahead, Mr. Miller.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Is there any way you could put up the picture showing the property as a whole? One of the first slides you put up. And mine is really more of just a question, engineering question, not the map one. Shows the whole property. Thank you. If you look at this slide, I'm directly adjacent. There's another property and then their property, and they all drain. The water flows for just natural drainage through all these properties, and it ends in the far western north corner, and it has nowhere to go. So it pools there. So there's no drainage, and that's a low spot. It's one of the lowest spots in all of Wildwood. My concern and question is, how can, as we see this change in movement, the drainage between all the properties there's no way to elevate that corner without flooding Tracy and Lulu next door, even worse than they're already being flooded. It's a sunken kind of hole there, and that's where all the water drainage comes for 3 properties, or roughly 10 or 12 acres of ours, and then plus another 8 acres of space there. So that would just be my question is there's no sewer pipe there. There's no nothing to get that water to displace, and it just has to sink in the groundwater. So concerned about, we already have backup as it is now. So I don't know engineering wise what can be done about that, but I would hope that would be in part of the planning that Joe does. Yes, sir.
You're the neighbor literally adjacent,
Right.
3326. Yeah. I was actually out there the other day, just kind of getting my head wrapped around what that all looks like.
Right.
When did you build your home?
Over the last 2 years, we moved in September of 23.
Of 23. Okay.
And all, we had to abide by all the new FEMA variations and whatnot too.
Right. Because
new lines.
It looks a little bit like your home. It's a beautiful home, and it's kind of raised up. It looks
Mhm.
like it's built up.
Right.
Is that it?
We're, as you can see, we're completely out of the floodplain.
Right.
So we were able to bring material in and raise up without any disturbance whatsoever.
Yeah, but that was kind of your approach to
Sure.
lift your home up,
Right.
Get it up a little bit.
You have to.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like
Groundwater is 4 feet deep at our original grade. 4 feet.
4 feet.
Yeah. So, and another question I guess I would have, again, just as an engineering question would be septic out there. What do we do about septic in a floodplain, like that? So that we know is going to flood.
So your home wasn't there because when I look at the map and what I remember from where your home is located, if your home would have been there in the 2019 or 17 flood, it would have been underwater. I mean, not the whole house, but it would have flooded because you were in the 500-year flood plain.
Right. It wouldn't have been up to we would be fishing off of the top of the grade. Our house wouldn't be underwater, but but the drop off is
You lifted it.
right.
Yeah,
Right. We went
you
up about 6 feet.
You went up about 6 feet. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chair, my next speaker is, and I apologize if I butcher this a little bit, Bub Bash at 347.
Finish.
Yeah, and he's at 3477 Whitsett Court.
Good. Please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
It's Robert Beisch, 3477 Whitsett Fork Road, and multiple areas around there that we encompass about 120 acres in the back valley. So,
Get you sworn in here, Mr. Beisch.
yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Proceed.
And I've actually heard what I think I wanted to hear. I came in late. I apologize for that, but I heard everything I wanted to really hear. And I'm just in support of the neighbors. We've been back in this valley for over 50 years now and own quite a bit of property and basically not really prepared other than to say that I support the neighbors that I've been with for quite a few years. So, but I've heard what I needed to hear for the placement of the property and so forth. So if there's any questions you wanted to ask me, that's fine too, but I put my card in there and name in there just in reference to supporting what I was hearing back there in the back, and I came in late. But
So would you want the board to grant the variance or not grant the variance? Just to be
would
clear.
not.
Yeah.
No, it would not, just
Okay.
simply because of the over all these years that I've been coming out here, I've only seen it's been the lakefront property is what we called it, for many, many times in the last few years, and it hasn't. But prior to that, the last 30, 40 years, I'd say it hasn't been like that. So I've seen the changes in the last, maybe 8 to 10 years at the most. So it's changed quite a bit. So
Thank you.
yes.
Thank
Anything
you,
else?
Mr. Beisch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ms. Keith, any additional speakers?
Mr. Chair, I am out of speaker cards. However, I do have, it looks like I do have a raised hand on my head.
Are you there, Ms. Lulu?
I am, yes.
If you could please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Yes, my name is Lulu Bogelin. I live at 3316 Witset's Fork. I am the house right next to the said property.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
I would just like to state that we are the first house on the street on Witset's Fork, right next to the creek, right next to the bridge. This is well over 125-year-old bridge that has flooded numerous times since we have moved in. When we purchased our house in 2014, we were told that, well, we were not in a floodplain when we purchased it. So here we are living in our dream house that we spent quite a bit of money for, now in the middle of a floodplain. I would just like to state, you know, our house is going to flood no matter what. We're right next to the creek. But what we are doing is just like what has happened in all the communities around us, is we're pushing this problem to somebody else. We allow this next person to come in and build up, which basically, from what I understand, could potentially actually help some of the flood problems. But we're not in an area we're not in an area that can support this type of building. From the amount of construction material that would have to come across our 100-and-some-odd-year-old bridge to elevate this plan, I think aesthetically, this is not going to fit into the valley of Witset's Fork, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. We have all in this area seen numerous floods with, as we heard earlier, you know, these floods, whether they be flash flooding or flooding from the Merrimack being, you know, so high, literally are turning over propane tanks, affecting our septic systems, and of course then affecting emergency vehicles getting in and out of these subdivisions that literally only have one way in and one way out. And you know, the flood maps are changing, and to allow this type of construction in this flood prone area already just doesn't make any sense. I have now lived next door to this property where 2 other people have come forth to the city of Wildwood to try to build on this property. And my heart goes out to all 3 of them, because I too am living in my dream house that is now in the middle of a floodplain. So my heart goes out to all of these homeowners, but the previous 2 owners who did not even want to build their property up to this dimension, to this level, were not able to build. So I guess the whole idea of this variance and building it right up to the floodplain line, which obviously in the next year or so is going to be even further into this person's property and where they're wanting to build their house, it just makes no sense to me. And as the neighbor, I could just say why you would want to build on this piece of property. I have no idea, but I really hope that the city of Wildwood will take all of these comments into consideration and protect the residents that are already here, dealing with what has rapidly changed within our valley of Wildwood and Witset's Fork just over the last 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you for your input.
Mr. Chair, I do have another speaker call from Jeff Grass at 3458 Woodsets Road.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, Jeff Grass, 3458 Woodsets Fork Road. I'm also the current president of the Road Association.
Get you sworn in here, Mr. Grass.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
George.
I think all my lovely neighbors just addressed everything that I was about ready to speak here tonight. I think there's great concern. I think this new floodline that has been outlined, I think needs to take great consideration by this board. I feel for, person trying to buy it, seems like he might not have known that information. I did try to look into purchasing this property, years ago, but it was more of a pasture, not putting a house on the property. But as, the current president of the Road Association, I'm just here to very support against this and support all my neighbors that are of strong concerns of this flood area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grass. Any questions? Any additional speakers online or in person?
Mr. Chair, I have no more speaker cards and the person online who had a chance to speak has spoken. Thanks.
Okay. Would anybody like to hear the oral presentation of the department's report? Seeing none. Any final comments or questions from the board? I'm sorry, first we'll hear any final comments or questions for the department, and then we'll get to board. Sorry.
Oh, first and foremost, I think it's more.
I'm sorry, Director, you just a moment. Is there someone else who wanted to speak? Sure. If you can, please come up to the podium. We'll get your name, address.
Hi, Todd Mashaney, 3540 Woodsets Fork Road. And
get you sworn in here.
Okay.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
So I guess I have a couple of questions. Going back, one was the flat work that was to be done. I guess I have a lot of questions about the whole construction, not that it matters in the grand scheme of things, but like the big orange square, what is that? Is a question. Would be my first question. Is that a driveway? Is that is there a way to get an answer?
Mr. Nance, would you like
Or
to
I can
weigh in on that?
I can
Or
run
we
a whole bunch of
Yeah,
questions.
if you want to ask the questions, and then what we can do is kind of bring that up as our final comments. We can certainly.
Okay, and then number two is
Mhm.
I understand the floodplain. Where in the old as well as the new FEMA maps, where's the 500-year floodplain? And then I was wondering, we've talked about the bridge and the ingress and egress, which again, I've lived there for 20 years almost now, and it's been underwater, impassable. And one situation was for days. So again, I have pictures that I would like to submit if you'd like to see, because a picture speaks 1,000 words. But going back to that, the date in 2019 was end of August, and August 26th, I think it was. And so shortly there, before or after, I'd have to again look at the pictures. But right afterward, the debris was so, I mean, it took a large excavator to move the trees from the bridge. Then shortly afterwards, like I had come home from work, there was another rain, couple-inch rain, and had more trees been there, it would have been under, impassable again. So it's been an ongoing issue, like you said, since the floods of 15, 17 and the 19 flash. But so what does the fire department say? I mean, I have a dry hydrant easement on my property, which is used for firefighting. But if you can't get a fire truck across that bridge, we have problems, much less emergency vehicles. But so my question is, how does that affect our bridge? I understand the no rise portion of it. But maybe that could be explained to me a little bit, because I don't understand how that's even possible. I mean, I don't know. And another question, I guess, would be, how many cubic feet of material are we putting in? And where is it coming from? And then last but not least, would be the, if it were to be approved, what kind of equipment are you moving that with? There's an 18-ton limit. So, are you moving it with, you might be able to get a D3 across there. I doubt it, but, so there's, a few questions, but, and again, if there's a way to add pictures, if you'd like to see them, I have plenty from just other issues of flooding that's happened through the whole valley that I've sort of dealt with. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Any questions? Mr. Nance, did you or the petitioner want to address any of those matters?
Yeah, so some of the questions is what kind of fill are we using? So under the structural portion of the house and in the driveway, we would fill that with either 2-inch or 1-inch clean, depending on where we're going to put it. Everything else would be dirt. And where would we get that material? Obviously, the rock's going to come from some nearby quarries. Dirt would come from the nearby area as well. Equipment that we use to place that is going to be like a 953 high lift. So it wouldn't exceed. The other thing we are required to do is brace the bridge, put some bracing on it to reinforce it whenever we do any kind of movement across it. And then we would be responsible if something was to happen as well. And then what is the area in the back of the house that was requested? It's not all going to be concrete. It's for a future backyard area. We're just making a flat area. So for a future pool or amenity, playground, patio, fire pit, things like that you can do outside the walkout of the house. And then as far as the no rise goes, I can have Chris come up from TWM to answer those questions if you would like, and how that was determined.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Nance. Could please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Yes, my name is Chris Keister with TWM Engineering. Address is 4940 Old Collinsville Road, Swansea, Illinois, 62226. We are the engineer for the petitioner that developed the no rise hydraulic report.
I'll get you sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
I wanted to speak to a few things, just kind of items that were mentioned by the city's report and the recommendation. We had prepared a hydraulic report for this site. As been mentioned before, we have been required to comply with a no-rise condition, which would essentially state that this construction would not cause an increase in the 100-year base floodplain on Carr Creek. We've talked throughout the night about the effective map and the preliminary map that has been circulating. The home, as shown on this plan, takes into account that preliminary map. So the low sill, the lowest opening of the house, which in this case would be the basement, is elevated 2 feet above the new preliminary map, which takes into account, as we've seen, a greater area, a higher 100-year base floodplain elevation. In addition to that, the State Emergency Management Agency, SEMA, that has developed the preliminary maps, they have made the hydraulic files, the HECRAS files, available to the public. So as part of our hydraulic study, we were able to obtain those files and then supplement their hydraulic sections in the model with a topographic survey of the site. So there were 2 or 3 conditions analyzed within that report. One was duplicating SEMA's model, which replicated the preliminary floodplain extents that are shown on the screen right now. The second was adding a new hydraulic cross section through this property. The SEMA model did not have a section within where the home would be constructed. So the second condition was in existing conditions that brought into account the survey of the land and the existing grades. The third condition was a proposed condition that showed this new grading on the home. And that comparison of the proposed conditions and the existing is how the no-rise calculation was developed. If there are any other questions about the analysis, I'm happy to answer those.
I actually do have a question. We've heard from a lot of the neighbors concern that the construction of this new home could impact their properties.
Correct.
And could alter in those flood conditions, because it sounds like it's going to flood. Is it going to make it worse for the neighboring properties?
Correct.
So is there a way to address that concern directly? I mean, I know you can't probably stand up and say, well, I guarantee, but they would probably like to have a guarantee. I mean, how can you address those concerns of the neighbors?
And so in this case, that concern is addressed through these no-rise calculations. If we had run our calculations and we had shown that as a result of this construction, it would raise the base floodplain elevation upstream, that's where we would show that this is not in compliance with the no-rise condition. The model, the hydraulic model that we were using, runs the length of Carr Creek to where it converges with Hamilton Creek further east of the site. I don't have the number in front of me as far as what the length of Carr Creek is or how many hydraulic sections are in that HECRAS model. But as part of the report that we've prepared, we've shown a high water elevation in the existing condition and in the proposed. And in that comparison, that's where we're showing no rise. So as far as to your question about if the site will make things worse or better, we're showing that it will keep things at an equal situation. Part of that is because this home, while it would be within the new preliminary floodplain, is at the very edge of it. So it is not in an area of heavy conveyance. It's at the very top of the screen, but the dashed blue line is the base floodway. And it's not the technical definition of what the floodway is, but for the most part, that is where the bulk of the conveyance of that channel is happening and where your higher velocities are happening within the channel of Carr Creek as opposed to the flood fringe where this home is being proposed.
So maybe for the benefit of the neighbors and maybe for some of us board members, if you bring soil and dirt in and create a rise there where the home's going to be, you're clearly filling in an area,
correct,
where water can't be now. How do you offset I mean, if you add, however many cubic yards or whatever of soil that takes away area for the water to be,
Right.
where do you make that up at? How do you do that?
Right. And so in some cases, there's compensatory excavation that occurs. In this situation, that is not one of them. One thing that is happening here with the driveway culverts, they're adding additional flow capacity. And it's below the orange circle in this drawing, but there are, I believe, 3 36-inch culverts in that driveway. So the fill, as you said, is being placed that will provide an area that blocks flows, but then that's being offset to some degree by those culverts beneath the driveway. So there is fill within the lot. Those culverts provide an additional outlet for any flows in the floodplain to move as well.
Mr. Miller, we have a couple questions.
Well, so you're saying that the addition of the culverts will equal the flow rate of the replacement of the sheet water flow rate of where the buildup is, so that there is no redirection of the conveyance of the water downhill?
No, what I'm saying is that the culverts are designed to convey flow running through the site, but they also provide an additional method of relief as that water moves from west to east through the site.
But if that relief is not at the same flow rate of what is being built up over, is that not going to cause a bottleneck and then create more water on the front end of the culvert before it has the chance to go through those 3 36-inch culverts? Won't it cause pooling to the right, essentially? So it's going to cause more flooding on the property immediately adjacent?
I would say no in this case. We're dealing in an area that's on the edge of the floodplain, so there's minimal velocity in these areas. As I was kind of explaining earlier with the floodway, that's the area where the higher flows are concentrated, and that's where the most velocity happens. If a culvert or an obstruction occurred in the floodway, then yes, I would agree, and that would be where there would be some more in-depth planning that happens. But in this case, on the edge of the floodplain, there's minimal velocity, so the backwater happening at a culvert is minimal because that velocity is lower.
I think a couple of the neighbors have
Yeah,
questions about the
reaction
velocity.
to that.
Yeah, Mr. Miller, if you could just come to the podium here and we'll address the board.
None of this is current because it doesn't have my house in there. So all that's changed because my house isn't represented there. The elevations aren't there. Yeah. And so that's all been elevated. So that changes. I mean, you're not even using current data. The other thing is all the velocities you're talking about goes back to my question, which is it moves all the water into that northwest hole that has nowhere to go. So you can put all the culverts you want in the driveway. All you're doing is moving that same water into which is basically my front yard into that corner, and you're moving more of it because of the displacement of the house. Where's it going to go? I mean, you can't raise that up because you're going to flood Tracy and Lulu. They were already on here talking about that. You can drain it back, but the elevations don't work. I don't think. That's why I was asking the question, because you're so far down. You're at creek level in that front corner. Unless you're going to build put a tunnel or a trough down there, there's nowhere for that water to go. So that comes back up on the road, goes back over to Tracy. So we have a mess in the whole front here. And again, you're not using current data. So I don't know how you can even talk about, flow rates and everything like that when you have an outdated map.
Understood, Mr. Miller. Ms. Egler?
Would it be possible to pull up Google Maps? We've heard a lot about this being at the very edge of the floodplain, and thus the velocities will be reduced. However, this is not what we have seen in 2019. What I'd like to show you is exactly where that propane tank got flipped, far out of the 100-year floodplain at high velocity, sufficient to pick up a mostly full propane tank after destroying my fence. All right. So if we zoom in just a little bit, you can see the green roof of my barn with the solar panels on it. Just a little bit to the left. You pull left. Yep, there's my barn. You can see how far away it is from Carr Creek. Carr Creek leapt out of its bank and came that far north. You can see next to Mr. Carter's garage there, that oblong white thing is his propane tank. I have a picture of that upside down that I could provide. And the fence, you can see that there's, the Carters also have a small garden there on the fence between us. The fence north of that garden, almost up to those cedar trees, has been torn down by flooding, by high velocity water moving through this area. And you will notice that all of this flows from left to right down Carr Creek towards Hamilton Creek behind the Boglins house. I understand that we are not raising the floodplain across the valley, but my concern is these large, very dangerous flash floods and creating choke points. So my question for the engineer is, did you have data on the 2019 flash flood, and was it taken into account when developing this model?
Yeah, we'll have you address the board if you want. Yeah, there seems to be a couple concerns about the data used and updated in that. Do you want to just elaborate and kind of keep it there?
Yes. So in terms of specific storm events, that data is not incorporated into this study. What is incorporated is the new hydrology that SEMA developed with their models. I can't speak to that. That information isn't public yet about the hydrology behind it. With the effective flood insurance report, there is a summary of rainfall histories that we could examine. We can certainly ask for that hydrology on this study, but any calculations that were made were off the preliminary map that shows a wider floodplain and higher base floodplain values.
And just to confirm, did that also include the existence of the house next door, or was all of your calculations done prior to its construction?
That I can't say. The hydraulic sections that we have, I would have to go back and verify if those did have the homes to the west or not. But one thing that does also happen in hydraulic analysis in this case is that if you have multiple structures in a row, you create what's called an ineffective flow area, and essentially they block flow as it moves. So that would be something that we would consider as well. The homes might not be in the model, but they might almost provide a shield for where this new home is built, which gets into a larger study of the floodplain, but it's also something that would come about.
Yeah, I have one question you can probably address. One of the criteria that staff has made a recommendation is a letter of map revision, the LOMAR.
Yes.
Can you go into the detail of that? Because I'm not sure the audience or the board totally understands that and what is entailed, and at the end of the day, what will be presented.
Yes. So as part of a letter of map revision, that is an application to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to FEMA. There's different ways of doing it. What we have proposed is a letter of map revision based on fill. And essentially what that process looks like is we're acknowledging that there will be a structure that is placed in the floodplain, but outside of the floodway, the area that is defined on these flood maps. In the flood fringe, there will be fill placed in it. One of the maps that we had earlier had a grayed out area. We're essentially stating that fill would be placed in the floodplain and would essentially remove that from requiring flood insurance. As part of that application process to FEMA, the local board, in this case, the city of Wildwood, has to provide community acknowledgement. Once we have plans, calculations, and that community acknowledgement, the application can be provided to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they will make an approval based on that.
That process sounds long. Can you weigh in on how long that takes and how difficult it is to get?
We have had timelines ranging from 2 to 6 months on a letter of map revision based on fill. From the time that it's submitted, which in this case it has not been because we're working through the community acknowledgement that we're discussing tonight. But from the time it's submitted till approval, I would estimate 2 to 6 months.
And what about the difficulty in obtaining? Is that something that you feel confident you can be successful in?
I do. And one of the things with that FEMA submittal, typically I have not seen where they've considered the preliminary map. So if we were going off the effective map, FEMA's main concerns don't really deal with the setback that we're discussing tonight for the variance is more of a local rule. Typically, FEMA's national rules are more concerned about where the fill is happening in the floodplain in terms of is it within the floodway or the flood fringe, and then what will the base floodplain elevation be against the lowest opening of the home. In this case, the home plan that we're providing is 2 feet above the preliminary base floodplain elevation, which is higher than the effective. So the way that FEMA would review it would likely be less stringent than how the city would review this, because they're going off a lower base floodplain elevation, and therefore FEMA would see more freeboard between the low opening elevation of the house and the effective floodplain elevation.
Any additional questions? Thank you. Wolf. Please come forward.
Yeah, Mark Bromeyer again. My property is just to the left of where the satellite view is. I don't know if this is a static. Yeah, that's my house there, just on the left side. At the creek, which is basically my property line, the civil engineer made some reference to, you know, the flow line of the creek and whatever. In 2019, probably part of the issue was that the flow line of the creek was diverted because there was like a 50-foot log jam at that curved portion of the creek, and probably forced the flow line farther north towards the houses. And you know, I can see that not being part of the calculations, but certainly part of an issue that could cause problems down the line. And the other thing, I don't know what 3 culvert pipes up near the road does, other than maybe provide a bridge for the driveway and some capacity for, you know, volume of water. I don't see the flow being up that far, you know, near the road. I do see it across the middle of those properties, right where the houses are, or, you know, the lower 2/3 there. But you know, those are some concerns or comments that I have about that.
Okay, thank you. I think we left off with the department was going to make their final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the board, again, Mr. Brown is here representing the city of Wildwood as its floodplain administrator. And also we have our city attorney, John Young. If there are any questions relative to them and any of the testimony provided to date, this would be an opportune time. So I just offer that one more time before the department presents its recommendation.
Just a quick question for me for a point of clarity. The bridge itself, is that city maintained or privately maintained?
It's privately maintained. public maintenance ends at the edge of right-of-way at Route 109. And the bridge is on Hamilton Creek, not Carr Creek, the floodplain area and floodway that's been referenced in most of the testimony is on Carr Creek. Mr. Chair and members of the board, the department has prepared a recommendation for consideration tonight. The city is in somewhat of a difficult position relative to this particular request for the simple fact that if the board does not grant the variance, then the property has almost no use for the purposes of a single-family dwelling. That being said, the NU non-urban resident district is a residential zoning district. It has been since September 1995. The department is confident in the engineer representing the petitioner and petitioner's representative. And I can assure you that I'm confident in the Department of Public Works and its analysis, because this is not the first time that we've had to address a difficult issue relating to floodplain and construction in the floodplain. Also, the 2 feet of freeboard from the low sill, that lowest elevation or opening on any building or structure, that is, as best as the department can describe it, our insurance policy. That, for all intents and purposes, gives us at least a better than average chance to ensure that if there is that 2019 flash flood, that for the most part, we've done everything relatively engineering possible to address it. Again, the situation is difficult. It's a valley. It's a convergence of 2 large creeks. It's not a great distance away from the Merrimack River. And for all intents and purposes, when the plat was approved by the city of Wildwood, there was a buildable area that was substantially greater than what is now shown. The city makes no excuses for applying the proposed floodplain elevation line. Again, from a cautious standpoint, I think the engineering and any decisions made should be under the worst case scenario, not, let's say, a lesser case scenario. And so from that perspective, the engineering's been compiled, the engineering's been reviewed and accepted by the city. Without the variance, the property has a limited utilization under the NU non-urban resident district. And for those reasons and others, the department's recommending approval of the variant. The department is available for any questions or comments. And again, I mentioned we have our city attorney and our director of public works to assist in any discussion. Thank you.
I do have a question, Director Vunich. I recognize the challenge that the city has in dealing with situations like this. And I want to applaud the city for trying real hard to make sure that, a building or a home doesn't go up that ends up getting flooded. And it seems like you've probably done a really good job on that front in terms of protecting the building. I think what I'm hearing, though, are the concerns of the neighbors of how that might affect, them. If we get another 2019 type flood. I grew up in an area where we had a lot of flooding, and it's amazing how floods decide they're going to do what they want to do. And the water goes where it wants to go. And no one ever anticipates it, but it seems like it has an odd way of happening. And so I guess, just as I asked the engineer this question, I just respectfully ask you, what kind of assurances can the city provide to the neighbors that a project like this will not adversely affect them?
Well, first and foremost, it's been explained to the board and its members that no rise certification is the indication that after analyzing all of the models from the state of Missouri through the federal government, on down to what we know empirically from just being here every day in the city of Wildwood. The no-rise certification takes into account the construction and says upstream, downstream, there should be no impact in that 100-year elevation. I make no light of this, but I don't know if you can, for all intents and purposes, reasonably engineer an event like 2019. It closed Interstate 44. It flooded homes on Fox Creek Road that had never been close to the water levels they saw. And in some instances, it may have been greater than a 500-year event. And if a 500-year event hits again, there's going to be those issues that arose in 2019. It's just one of those things that you reasonably calculate the risk. You use best available information, engineering models, past data, and you, for the most part, reach a conclusion that is based on science and the best available information that that can be assessed and used to make that decision. The risk obviously is something we take into account, and we're very concerned about it. That's why we required those conditions as part of the recommendation. It's our way of hopefully doing the best the city can, recognizing the neighbors have as much of a concern about the future as the property owner. And for those purposes, that's why we're asking for the conditions. But again, as I say, the city and the departments are in an unusual position because without a favorable recommendation and taking into account reasonable conditions, which I believe the city has, the property just has a very, very limited use. And certainly the intended use, as you see from the aerial photography, is single-family detached dwellings on large lots. And relatively speaking, this is one of the largest single lots in the subdivision at 12 plus acres.
Director Vunich, does structure size, area of level, whether it's flat work or any future improvements, size of driveway, is that, we talked about that in other things when we're talking about natural preservation areas and things, could we move this? Could we shift this? Can you downsize this? Does any of that weigh in, or does it really come down to that same, if it's a no-rise certification, it's a no-rise certification?
The only option that the department didn't necessarily identify in its report is that from the edge of the Whitsett Fork roadway easement, which is 70 feet in width, so from that southern edge of it, there is a 50-foot setback. The building itself is not at that 50-foot setback. It is a little further back. So from the perspective of what the engineer for the petitioner noted, if we really want to get further and further into that fringe area, you reduce that front yard setback to that minimum 50-foot distance or whatever is reasonable there. So there may be another step in the process. But again, referencing the no-rise certification and the steps that have been taken to date, we're doing the best we can to address all of the components, that being the neighbors as well as the property owner.
Is there any, and maybe it's not, but could they build on the north side of Wissett's?
Well, certainly there, as you can see from the aerial photograph that Ms. Keefe has provided, there are homes on the north side of Whitsett Fork. It's a very steep situation. From the perspective of the department, driveway grades are often worrisome because of that, particularly in any inclement weather. But there may be a need for a variance just because of the setbacks there. Again, remember, we have a 70-foot roadway easement, a 50-foot setback from that. So we're pushing any improvement, structure or building, fairly high up on that slope.
Yeah, so, I know there's concern, and I get it, about the intended purpose. I mean, these lots, you want to be able to build a home on it. If the variance isn't granted, we don't know whether or not they could really build on this lot yet, right? I mean, unless the petitioner has looked at building on the north side, we don't know whether the ability to build a home is taken away from that lot. Do we?
Well, I would say with the permission of the chair and the board, and no objection from the city attorney, we could ask the representative from Lombardo Homes if they did investigate using the portion of the property on the north side of Witsis Fork Road or the building pad for the single family dwelling. I don't know. Again, when the department and the city approved the Carter Corners plat, we were looking at this area because the surveyor who signed and sealed the document said that there was available space on the lot that was not floodplain impacted.
Sure.
Mr. Nance, do you have any thoughts on alternate building sites?
If you're able to pull up the site plan, I think it shows the steep topography that's on the north side there. You can see how tight the lines get. So that's basically cliff on that side. That you would have to, you're talking blast, either you'd have to blast that whole thing, and then you can see the small dash line, which would be the width of the building area. That's within that, on that side. And you can see how big the house is. So you'd have to have a very small footprint, even if you could get it over on that side, and a steep driveway to come up to it. It's just, to be honest with you, it's not feasible to build on that side and economically, be able to fit anything within that footprint and on that steep ground.
Thank you, Mr. Nance.
You're welcome.
Mr. Miller, do you have a comment, question?
Yeah, it's the same question I've asked twice now and I've got no answer to, which is the drainage situation up there in the mosquito ponds that we have right now. Second question I have, hopefully I get an answer from the city. Just curious, how many home proposals have you all rejected on that property over the last 6-7 years? And why?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Vunich?
Well, to address the first question from Mr. Miller, the area where water ponds, that is in the vicinity of the floodway, the actual channel where most of the conveyance occurs of runoff. And as you can see, the city is saying stay out of there. So certainly if there's a proposal amongst the neighbors to try to address that storage area, as I would describe it, certainly our Department of Public Works can consider that and address it within a reasonable approach. But again, in terms of floodway, our code says stay out of it, period. Now, we allow it for bridges and culverts for crossings when, again, without that accommodation, the property's value is reduced substantially. The second question, which now I seem to have forgotten.
How many variances?
Or other requests for homes?
The only other individual that the departments discussed future development on this site with was the previous owner. We had a number of issues with him. He blocked drainage on his property, so the flow from west to east was problematic. And I believe Mr. Miller contacted the city, and we tried to address it as best we can so that the flow would be restored. And then obviously we mentioned the illegal structures. In terms of how many others, the Shepherds owned this property and had subdivided it, and their intent, as I recall, was the future sale to some type of family member. But that was, I don't remember anything ever being submitted. So this is, from the perspective, at least of the director of the department, the first time we've seen an actual plan for the utilization of the site for a single family dwelling. I can certainly check our records though, but that's about the best I can offer off the top of my head.
And just to be clear, I don't think That's our creek.
Yes, sir.
So when you're talking about your mosquito ponds, I mean, north is this way. Yeah, so where are your mosquito, I mean, where's the flow problem right down in here? The water's running that way. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, for the benefit of the court reporter, if anyone's going to provide testimony, it should be done at the microphone.
Please come up.
Hi, Eric Teagarden. I just want to note, so for the northern area there, I'm at 3340. We're essentially the property that's just off screen to the right of the current image. Basically the same shape on the property as what's shown here. Same I can't speak exactly to the topography, but it's very similar as far as how steep it is. And I have a house there. It functions. So and you know, there's a fair amount of width there. If you look at assuming the dashed line area, I think is the area that's permissible in theory to build in. The square footage of that area is actually, I think, quite in excess of the area of the house. I mean, probably you wouldn't build a rectangle that's the entire width of the property, but I did some back of the napkin math on that, and I think there's about 21,000 square feet of area on that slope. Granted, it's on a slope. There may be other considerations. You got to fit a driveway, etc. But you could build a fairly sizable home. There would probably be challenges, but it wouldn't require building up in the floodplain or a variance, as best as I know.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Teagarden.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We have a raised hand online.
Okay. We'll go ahead and address the questions or comments from that individual online. If you could please state your name, address, the same individual. Is it a new individual, Ms. Keefe?
It's
Oh.
Ms. Lulu.
Yep. I'm sorry, no need to swear you in. Go ahead, please proceed,
Okay.
Ms. Lulu.
Hi, Lily Boglin again at 3316 Whitsets Fork. So a couple of things that I have. So the gentleman who, there have been two other people trying to build on this. In fact, the Shepherds, I sat in a meeting for a variance for them as to where they wanted to build their barn, and it was denied. Again, for floodplain reasons. The gentleman after the Shepherds who, now Mr. Johnson bought the property from, they had two different plans that I remember them showing me. They never went for a variance, and that individual just started putting things on that property as stated illegally. Some of the drainage that he has already put in, including culverts, do not work. If anything, they're causing more poolage of the water. So I just want to state that. The one thing that I want to talk about is not just the 2019 flood, that was flash flooding. Our bridge went under just a month ago with flash flooding. That was not even recordable anywhere. The way we sit in the valley, regardless of flash flooding or the water coming from the Merrimack River, this is a floodplain. This is a flood valley. And I understand you have the engineered reports, but you know, how ultimately, if we're building this up, this area was under 5 feet of water, 5 feet of water in 2018. I don't know how we're forgetting that. Okay. Then you talk about 2019, that was flash flooding. And I don't think what we're taking into consideration is the runoff from the hill on the opposite side, on that northwest side of Whitsets Fork, where you're now stating that potentially this person could build a house. The amount of rainwater that comes down off of that hill into this property is crazy. And that is where so much of this flooding is coming from too. So where is that water now going to pool when we're building this piece of property up another 13 feet? Now we're blocking Whitsett's Fork Road even further down the road than just at the bridge level. I just this all due respect to the engineered reports, when you have lived it, and those of us who are on this street have seen the water on this street, and in this particular property, it just makes no sense that we would grant this variance at all.
Thank you. Director Bunich?
Again, thank you for the clarification, but again, as was mentioned, the past owner for the current petitioner appears to have not submitted any plans to the city for review. And the department weighs its decision-making process based upon whether it's a single-family dwelling or an accessory building. And obviously, an accessory building does not reach the level of a single-family dwelling and denying the principal and probably the most logical use of the property. Thank you.
Any other questions?
One
for
more
the
question,
department?
Director, from my side, just on the logistical side. So we've mentioned the no rise letter. We've mentioned the LOMR certification or wherever that is. Where are we at in the process for all that? So if we guarantee or grant the variance tonight, there is still a chance that those remaining items might not be granted and the build would not move forward? Or is this the last obstacle in the way? Just so I can understand, XYZ 1, 2, 3 order of events here.
I believe the Department of Public Works with the city of Wildwood has reviewed the no rise certification and approved it. So that particular item has been completed. The letter of map revision, the LOMAR, that typically is done after the floodplain administrator for the city has basically that follows this process. The variance has to be in place before the LOMAR can be completed. At least that's my understanding. Yes.
Thanks. Any other clarifications for the department?
Thank you.
Other comment, question?
Sorry, one more item.
Yep.
Mr. Vunich, what is the property zoned as?
It's a combination of the NU non-urban resident district and the floodplain NU non-urban resident district.
So in 95, it was zoned non-urban or urban, non-urban residential. I think I got it right. But the floodplain FEMA maps and what have you have changed drastically over those 25 years. So we're saying that we can zone it and it's permanently zoned that way. And if it floods, it floods and we just work around it and we say it's okay. I just don't understand how the two can go together. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it can't be built to a residential, or it shouldn't be. But to say it's permitted, but in a poorly drained area, it just doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Well, Director Vunich.
To the board and chair, the zoning maps of the city will be changed when the revised firm maps are adopted. So that's when we make the changes to the floodplain line. Again, we're being cautious here and using those proposed floodplain lines and elevations. So as we ensure that we're not, for all intents and purposes, assuming that those lines won't be adopted, which we believe they will.
Director Brown.
Thank you. I wanted to make just a quick comment because I think there's a lot of confusion maybe that might be cleared up. The floodplain code that we currently adhere to is dictated by and large by FEMA. When we accept the National Flood Insurance Program, we adopt ordinances that are largely required by FEMA. FEMA's program is based on a 100-year flood event, a 1% probability of exceedance in a given year. And so we have to evaluate that event to determine if the structure or a project is reasonably safe for flooding. And we've done that in this case. You've heard the petitioner and the engineer for the petitioner. They did a flood study for us, very thoroughly done. We had a second party engineer review it that evaluated that 100-year event and determined there was no rise. In our minds, no increase in flood risk to adjacent property. I've also heard people reference flooding in this area, in the valley, in the creek, and certainly we've seen that. And I don't want to discount that by any stretch. I've seen it firsthand. We saw it in 2015, 2017, and then 2019. There were 2 floods on Carr and Helmsley Creeks in 2019 that, by my estimation, exceeded a 100-year event. And Joe referenced at least one of them, quite possibly was in the 500-year range. So we've had extreme flooding in this watershed, certainly. The evaluation we're required to do, though, is based on the 100-year flood event. And then we have tried to be conservative and base the elevation of this house on the upcoming map and the data from that we received from SEMA so that it will work based on the 100-year event in the proposed maps. So we're doing our best to follow the ordinances that we are required to follow from at least the department's perspective. But I wanted to make that comment so to try to clarify, we use a certain yardstick and it's the 100-year event, and that's dictated by FEMA in the National Flood Insurance Program.
Thank you, Director Brown. Any final comments from the department? Or is that At this time, we will close the proceeding for a vote. I have a motion to approve, a motion to deny, or approve with conditions. Any other?
In the event that you've received a lot of information and you're kind of struggling with whether the variance is justified or not justified, there is a 4th option. You can postpone to the next meeting to allow yourself time to assimilate all the information you have. If you haven't had a chance to visit the site, I know most of you always do. That's an option as well. But again, just giving you that 4th option that we sometimes use when the cases are a little more complicated than, let's say, a setback reduction for a deck.
Thank you for that additional comment, Director Bunich. Member Lee.
Thank you. With the criteria that the staff has come up with regarding this, if the board and the audience would contemplate maybe another criteria, and I kind of mentioned this on the last meeting, was to make this a win-win for everybody and be able to store more water on this property since he's filling it, which would be a less than no rise situation. It would be an improvement for everybody under a flash flood scenario and 100-year flood. That would require additional grading on the site, but it would also provide a little safety factor here because of the process of the way that you calculate and do things. You have runoff coefficients from the new neighboring house that's going to accelerate water coming in a flash flood. You have the surrounding topography, whether it's grass, rock, pavement, all of that is
factored into this. And I think for the benefit of the new home, plus all the neighbors, it would benefit the entire area if something like that were considered in this site plan. Right now, I think we have a no rise, which means that if the floodwaters come up, it's going to hit that same level. But if we could create something that would lower it slightly, I think that would help everybody and alleviate a lot of the concerns. So I don't know if that's something that staff would be willing to do, or the neighbors get together, but that would be my recommendation.
Board Member Lee, I have a question for you. Not being an engineer for floodwater stuff, is that within the realm of doability? Is that conceivable that you could create a situation that actually improves the situation? Because I think the neighbors would love that. I would hope.
It's a cut and fill calculation, but it also have to go with the floodway, because a flood rises and falls under a timed event. Stormwater runoff happens instantaneously. The flood would then follow. This is all part of the calculation the civil engineer would do.
I would imagine that process would obviously Lombardo Homes, Mr. Nance, Mr. Johns would have plenty to discuss and think about, and engineers, as well as the board, the audience. Is that something regardless of, we can either make it a condition and a recommendation, and I don't know if that will move the needle on a motion, or we can decide that we would like to postpone the proceedings with the intention of looking into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm heavily conflicted because I absolutely empathize with the owner of the property. You're thinking you can build a home, and surprise, now you've got this new floodplain thing you have to deal with. So that seems hard, and it is. But I also hear the voices of the neighbors, and I am very, very empathetic with the neighbors. I think the city prides itself in listening to the neighbors and taking their comments very, very much into consideration. So if there was a way, and I don't know, maybe the engineer could say, well, yeah, we could look at that and see if there would be a way to actually improve it. And I that would certainly move the needle for me personally. I don't know how the other board members feel, but I don't feel real comfortable today saying yes to this. But if there's a way to create a win-win, like Board Member Lee has suggested, that would be great. That would be great, I think, anyway.
I think what's at stake here is obviously, I don't think it's fair to put anybody on the spot to address that tonight. So I think it would be up for the board to, at this point, well, officially, Attorney Young, can the petitioner still request a continuance, or will just have to come from the board at this point?
Well, the board is certainly within its right to postpone its vote.
So that would come down to the board decision. Again, I don't want to litigate all that tonight with, what could be a win-win in that, but.
I think one comment I would offer before we consider whether postponement's appropriate, just to build on the win-win possibilities. We heard some testimony about, sheet water coming down the northbound slope and things like that. You should consider maybe trenching the north side of the road on the property a little bit. That might alleviate some of the sheet water coming down and pooling in the culvert area. And I think personally, I would like to get some further confirmation that the newer house that was put in was considered in the calculations, so that was considered, because he's at the most immediate risk. And I would not personally feel comfortable approving without some sort of confirmation that no rise and everything else and the velocity of the culverts was created based on that existing property being built. So that would be where I'm at before I would conclude that probably making a motion for a postponement. So,
that being said, I think we're to the point where we will,
I guess the only question I have Chairperson, is, you know, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if it's like, well, no, there's no way, you know, it's like, no, the sun's not going to rise in the west. Well, then we're just kicking the can down the road.
Right.
But if there would be some way of saying, well, that would be a potential thing that we could really consider, and there's a possibility, no guarantees, but at least, you know, if we think there's a chance of that, you know, then I think it would help us, you know, decide whether to just vote tonight and be done with it, or actually ask for the postponement.
I think we've offered enough questions and concerns and alternatives that before making a definitive vote this evening, we should at least afford both the neighbors and the petitioner the opportunity to think about it for the additional period of time, because if there is a solution in there, I wouldn't want to cut it off tonight.
Sure.
Before that's availed itself.
Agreed.
So, you know, that being said, I would say let's go ahead and postpone unless there's any final comments or thoughts as to what we would want to see provided next meeting time before we do make a final decision.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're getting a sense that we're just a little uncomfortable with where it is right now. We want to give a little bit more time for the engineers and the neighbors to kind of work on that. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a motion to postpone our decision until the next meeting.
Do we have it?
Would you maybe make that contingent on the hearing of additional testimony before the decision is made, just immediately starting, just so that we have that as a formal option? So postponement, I guess, do we need to do it in a way that will preserve the right?
If it is the intention of the board to gain additional testimony, which it sounds like it very well may be the case, my suggestion is to do this in multi-steps. One is to have a vote, motion and a vote to reopen the public hearing or reopen the hearing, then to continue the hearing until the next meeting. By second vote.
So,
I'll make that motion.
so what, do we have a motion to reopen
The public hearing,
Yes.
it will stay open until we can get further input from both parties, the applicant and the neighbors and staff. That's how I want to present this, so that, again, looking for a win-win. I don't know, it doesn't have to be much, but I you know, when you're challenged with zero rise, it's difficult, especially with the runoff and the information that we have new about the home that's been built. And, you know, that flash flood event, if that flash flood event becomes a non-event in the flood calculation, then that needs to be stated.
To clarify, Mr. Lee, I believe Attorney Young was saying we had officially closed the proceeding for a vote. So first, we'll have a motion to reopen tonight's hearing.
Make a motion to reopen the public hearing.
And I'll second that.
And say, okay, so we will take a vote on that. Mr. Lee, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Sprunger?
Yes.
Mr. Lux?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Who did I? Yes, Madam Bartolino, sorry, over there, we're too far apart. How do you vote? Oh, we do, okay. Then I myself vote as well to reopen the public hearing here. So the hearing is reopened. Any additional input you were looking for tonight, or when you said you wanted to reopen it, that's to continue this to the next meeting?
That's to continue to
Okay.
the next meeting, and we will pick it up there with further information obtained.
So the next step would be a motion to continue the hearing until the next meeting, which will be on June.
Then I will go ahead and submit a motion to continue until said meeting on June 20.
We have a second on the motion to continue this proceeding to the June meeting.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Sprunger?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lux,
Yes.
and I vote to proceed or to extend the proceedings to next month to June as well. So we will pick this up to the 20th. Director Bunich, Mr. Young, are there any other formalities on regarding this particular?
No, sir.
That being said, that this petition will be moved to next meeting. There is one addition or one item of additional business tonight's agenda. This item is to approve the minutes of the board's April 18th, 2024 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the past meeting.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Approve.
Mr. Sprunger?
Approve.
Mr. Lee? Mr. Lux?
Approve.
And I, as chair, approve as well. I do need to request a motion to go into a closed session immediately following this proceedings under legal actions, causes of action, litigation, or privileged communications between the city's representatives and its attorneys. According to RSMO 610.021-1994. Do we have a motion to go into a closed session?
I'll make the motion to go into the closed session.
And a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Morris, how do you vote? Mr. Sprunger?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lux?
Yes.
And I vote to go into the closed session as well.
And Mr. Chair, members of the board will hold the closed session in the community room. So if you exit to your right and go through the door, we'll meet you in there.
Excuse me. This is the court reporter.
Yes.
Am I to be in the closed session?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very much. And I will see you later.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll second.
Adjourn.